So this is part 2 of the painting process, and in this video I'm going to show you how I'm going to paint the detail in the musical instruments. So we're going to start off, and we're using watercolour technique, so starting off with a base colour, and I always like to put in my lightest areas first. So I'm going to start off with the lightest colour that I can see in the wood, and I'm using yellow to start. This is yellow ochre, but you could actually use just brilliant yellow if you haven't got that. So this is just basically watered down yellow ochre. If I was going to make this colour, I would add a tiny little bit of red and a tiny bit of black to it to make a slightly darker yellow. So all I'm doing is using quite a nice flat brush to just put a thin wash of that colour down. So I'm using the paint quite thinly, and you can tell because you can still see the drawing through it. So all I'm trying to do is just put a base colour down to start me off. And I've just done exactly that on everywhere I can see the brown, or anywhere that's going to be wood in the picture. What I just wanted to do now is to show you how I'm going to make a series of different browns. So I'm going to show you how to do this both using the yellow ochre or using brilliant yellow. So just looking at all the different tones and range of browns that you can see. And again, I've got my 2 yellows, and I'm just wetting the paints that I'm going to use. So it just activates the colour by wetting the paint. Just popping a bit of that on my palette. And that's the colour that we've just put down onto the painting. So cleaning my brush and then activating both of the red and the black. And these are the 2 colours that I'm going to use to create my browns using the 3 together. So basically it's a suck it and see sort of thing. So if you just start mixing these into each other, you will see that you will get different browns according to the amount of each colour you add. So to make a warmer yellow, a more yellow brown, I'm adding more yellow into my mix. And then I can go darker by adding a little bit more. That's exactly the same colour again. I'm adding a little bit more red and a little bit more black, and it will give me a darker brown. So again, as I say, you've just got to really experiment with what colours you're going to get by using different proportions. So here I've mixed myself a nice dark brown, which I will be using. But you can see that, and I'm just showing you now that on that I can actually use the brilliant yellow to get exactly the same effect. So that's a little bit of black on my brush already. I'm adding a little bit of red into that, a little bit of more black, and that again is just going to give me a dark brown. So it doesn't really matter which of the yellows you use, you can use either. But you can achieve any brown you like using that mix. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm trying to paint the shadow onto the side of the violin. So just looking at the image, you can see I'm holding it. I'm just putting the darkest tones in. So I'm just sort of lightly with my brush, sort of sketching in where I can see that dark tone in the picture. I'm now going to do the same, looking at it and just placing it exactly where I can see the same sort of tone. Then just going to mix a darker brown or another brown. Actually, it's not a darker brown, it's a more yellowy, warm brown, and it is the middle of that area. So just popping that in, and then all I'm going to do is put it in the same on both sides wherever I can see it, and then I'm going to get a little bit of water and I'm going to soften the edge of those 2 areas so that it blends nicely. Just softening that edge so it looks more of a smooth area. So just softening it out where it needs to be softened. Now mixing in some black to get a darker brown. And then where I can see a much darker shadow, I'm going to put this dark brown in that place. So I'm trying to achieve a tonal effect by using paint. So it really is important that you look at the image that you are using, the photograph or what you've got in your book, and try to match the same tones, because that's what's really going to make your image look three-dimensional. So I'm just tweaking the colours that I can see until I'm happy. And then the top bit, I'm just going to give a little wash of a mid-brown, and I will be adding my highlights later and any other details. So I'm letting that area dry. So I'm now going to move on to the bit in the middle with the swirl, which is actually the end of the musical instrument. So again, mixing sort of like a mid warm brown. And I'm just going to paint the whole of this bit first of all, because my yellow is just like my underpainting, so just sort of getting rid of that to start off with. And then I'm putting in the darkest areas now, so the dark brown shadows that I can see, just sketching them in lightly to start off with. And then using a thin brush to do my detail, and then using the same brush as I used for the mid brown that I've just painted to blend it out. So I've still got that warm brown colour on my brush, and it's just sort of trying to blend those colours into each other. So this is just meant to be like a shaded effect rather than a harsh outline. So I'm just trying to get the highlights and the sort of mid-tones in before I put my darkest areas in, which is what I'm doing now. I've mixed black into my brown and I've got a really dark brown. So this is just to try to achieve the darkest shadow on this bit of the musical instrument. So remember that all the time you need to be looking at your photograph of your musical instrument, which is what I was doing whilst I was painting this. And then whilst that's drying, I'm just going to paint this little black shape, the cutout on the violin. And the reason I'm doing that is because I need to let the second bit of painting dry before I put my final detail in. So that's a really important thing if you want stuff to stay crisp and you don't want your colours to blend. You do need to let areas dry before you go back and work on the details. So just neatening those edges up. And then coming back and adding some detail into my dry paintings. So just zooming in to show you what I'm going to do next. So I've got a really dark brown edge, and I'm just putting the really darkest tones that I can see in the photograph with a thin brush. And I've decided that my darkest tones aren't quite dark enough now that I've more or less done. So again, I'm just going back in with another layer. And this is the best way to do it. If you start off light, you can build up your layers. What I'm doing there is I'm just taking a little bit of that off by cleaning my brush, drying it, and it acts as a straw to take off the excess. And I'll be doing that again in a minute, you'll see. And then just getting rid of the highlight, which is the wrong colour, and again using a dry brush to suck up the excess. Going slightly darker with my brown colour on the top as well. It wasn't quite dark enough. Then just refining the shape of this a little bit more with a tiny bit of black. and putting my final really dark shadows in to try to give this a little bit more dimension, because it's not quite looking three-dimensional enough. And I just wanted to refine this spiral shape a tiny bit more. And then just painting in the side of the top of the handle. So you can see I've worked in all different areas of the painting rather than just working on one bit at a time, because I needed to let things dry before I added my next layer. So the final thing is to add my highlights. Now I did deliberate about whether to use acrylic paint, but I had some chalk, so I just used a little bit of chalk, but I could have used a white pencil, or a white oil pastel would do equally well. So I've just looked to see where the highlight is in the photograph, and then just started to add it onto anywhere I can see it in the photograph. I'm going to add a little bit onto the side of the violin, just placing it exactly where the shine is on the actual violin photograph. Anywhere I can see a whitish highlight, I've added that in. And the last thing I want to show you is just how to paint the wood grain effect. So I'm taking a thin wash of a mid-brown colour, and you can see that all the time I'm using my same palette and just tweaking the colours on that. So I'm just watering that down slightly with a little bit of water on my brush, just spreading that down. And then whilst that is still wet, I'm trying to achieve these sort of thin woody lines. I'm just going to take the edge of my brush, a little thin brush. I'm going to pick up some more sort of a mid-brown and start putting some really thin lines that are all going in the same direction. Because if you look at wood grain, it's not straight lines, they are quite wobbly, but they all do go in the same direction. So I'll put a few sort of quite dark lines in, then I'm just taking a little bit of water on my brush and softening those lines out. So what you can see is a lot of little stripes, little broken lines, and that just gives more of a texture to the guitar, to the wood. Okay, so that's it finished for this bit. I am going to finish off the wood bits on the rest before I come back with the final details and the final colour and text in the background. So that's stage 2 of the painting completed.